that's great, but it's still the same basic technology that, was put in place years and years ago. So I don't think that, it works and it's great, but I don't, to answer your question directly, yeah, it's tired. It's probably going to require a refresh in the not too distant future. Alta and eFront really have the benefit of being on modern platforms, and Alta, by making the decision to go with Microsoft, basically that future-proofed their platform in a way that neither eFront nor Investtrend have the benefit of basically riding on top of Microsoft's development.
But symmetrically, do you see Alta Return being capable of kind of bringing that flexibility and optionality that would allow it to compete on more complex and larger funds, or because they've made kind of that bet of riding on Microsoft, that's an inherent limit to what they can do?
No, I don't think there's a limitation. I think that there's no technology limitation. Rather, I think that it will be predicated on their ability to win business and use that to grow the platform beyond its more limited feature set. I know, for example, that a client asked them to build a portfolio monitoring solution, so they did. It's very limited. It doesn't do a ton, but if you're basically, if your needs are simple, you can get it done in Alta. So I think they're committed to trying to build it out, but it's going to be ultimately a question of how well they scale the business and how much they're able to plow back into development. I mean, I think the Microsoft platform is not limited at all. It's a GL, a CRM tool, and a very extensible one. So as long as you've got competent developers, you can do whatever you need to with it.
And do you see them potentially being more successful or competitive in Europe or in Asia, I mean, outside of their core U.S. market in the future?
Again, that's a business question, and I think that the value proposition that they bring is compelling enough to be applicable in multiple geographies. I don't see why it wouldn't play overseas, but whether or not Ray and Custodio have the chops to build a European team or a Middle Eastern team remains to be seen.
And maybe still another business question, but kind of a consequence of what we just said, because if we look a bit on a high level basis, we're basically saying high complexity, and you're probably looking at either eFront or Investtrand, probably not too far away prices, with eFront being a more modern solution with more optionality and more end-to-end. On the other end of the spectrum, if you are low to medium complexity, you have solutions like Alta Return, which are much easier to implement and to use. Obviously, you can't do everything with it, but if your needs are limited, it works fine. One would tend to believe that the very high complexity clients are probably already using something or already equipped, and that the kind of white space would be larger for low to medium size players, and that consequently the development kind of potential would be higher for someone like Alta Return than for eFront. Is that something that, even though it's more a business question, that you would agree on, or?
I would generally agree with that conclusion, yes. That, if you were to look at the mega players in the PE space, for example, they all have something in place today. So what's the growth path there? And even once you get north of, let's call it, well, if your fund size is greater than $2 billion, you probably have something in place, right? That being said, I know plenty of funds that are in that $1 to $2 billion space that are still doing stuff in Excel every day.
But I assume that category would typically fall within, the sweet spot of an anti-return, no?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I just, and I have a fund that I work with that is, they're 25 professionals, but they have a 1.5-ish in their most recent fund under management.
Yep.
So that means that their ops staff is 3 people, and they can't possibly fathom the idea of going to an E-front.
Yeah.
That won't happen.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah.
Okay.
But also is very compelling to them, that being said.
I have one question on my end. We feel that more and more players from the liquid assets classes are penetrating the private equity markets. What will be your views on this? Is that something that you sense as well?
Can you give me an example of who you're talking about, what you're thinking?
For example, a player like SimCorp. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I'm not. Generally when I walk into a new fund, which, it doesn't happen all that frequently, but when it, the typical lift that I have to talk about is getting out of Excel and into something else. Usually what's happening is they're dealing with the management company in something like QuickBooks or, something very simple, because those are pretty straightforward situations to handle. And they're doing all of their LP allocations, in Excel. So how do they solve that problem? And I think that, that they don't see a straight path with the products that are off the shelf that are not, so the first thing they do is they do a Google search on, private equity, fund accounting. And what do they see? That's my experience. So.
I think just following up on what Sasha said, I think players like Fund Account seem to have an offering that kind of spans both the illiquid and liquid asset managers and has been gaining share. So I guess it's not 100% relevant for purely the GP side, but maybe on larger asset managers that have the requirements.
Yeah.
Correct, exactly. Perhaps that's not something that you see so much.
No, and I've seen, in the mega space where there's players who, have multiple lines of business, what I have seen is, people will have a hedge product and then they'll have a PE product and they'll try to bridge that using whatever they can, and then they'll maybe have everything consolidate in through, an Oracle, something like that. But that's a pretty limited subset of the world and only in, applicable in places like, a Blackstone or a Cerberus. That.
I have another question really around, you mentioned barriers to entry and the unlikelihood of a new entrant coming into the space that would, disturb the likes of Alta Return, eFront, and Investran. What are your views on, really transformational technologies such as blockchain?
I don't spend a whole heck of a lot of time thinking about blockchain, honestly. It's just not in my day-to-day wheelhouse, and